Hello, everyone. Kathy Bacon here for What's Your Story? Thank you so much for joining me tonight. I am so excited about my guest. The past couple of interviews have been guests that I've interviewed before, and it's been about 3 or 4 years now. So I'm very excited to have them back on and hear what's happening with them. My guest tonight has a lot going on, and I am so excited to hear her story. I want to thank you all for tuning in. I want to thank you all for emailing me. I want to thank you all for connecting with me and supporting me in this venture because it's very important to me that I bring people to you that are willing to tell their story. And there's no judgment here. Everyone has their own unique story. Sometimes it's full of love and laughter. Sometimes it's full of pain and sorrow. But whatever it is, we are so lucky to have the opportunity to listen and for them to give us the opportunity to listen. I do this show to create human connection because, as you know, the way the world is today, with all the technology, it's just so easy to text and email and really not see people if you don't need to. So when people tell their stories on this show, you're able to see their face. You're able to see how they feel. You're able to see how their story has affected them and their journey. So thank you so much again for being part of my journey on this great show called What's Your Story? Tonight, my guest is Cara Jones. And Cara Jones is a multiple Emmy Award-winning reporter, personal story coach, and founder of Storytellers for Good. And I first interviewed Cara when she was doing Storytellers for Good, and she's still doing Storytellers for Good. I'm sure she'll tell us a little bit about it. From boardrooms to thatched huts around the globe, she has spent the last 2 decades deeply listening to people's stories and crafting them into meaningful narratives. In addition to creating short films on inspiring humans, from India's first surfer girl to a team of homeless marathon runners, Cara is devoted to helping leaders amplify their impact through compelling personal narratives that speak to the heart via Story Breakthrough, which, in fact, you can find out more about at www.cara-jones.com. Her own journey of writing her first memoir and creating a feature-length film on her family's unique religious upbringing has informed and inspired this work. Cara is a Moth Story Slam winner, and if you don't know about Moth, please look it up right now. I've been to a few of the slams, and they're just amazing with people telling their stories. She's a slam winner, and her work has been published in Washington Post, Boston Globe, and the Huffington Post. She has shared her storytelling workshops at South by Southwest, the Goodwill Industries International Conference, and companies around the San Francisco Bay. She loves popcorn, international travel, and is grateful that after many years of traveling solo around the globe, she is now living out her greatest adventure as a wife and a new mom. And I can tell you, you are going to love her story and listen so carefully to it because here she is, Cara Jones. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Kathy. Really, it's an honor to be here, and thank you for that amazing introduction. And good to see you after all these years.
Yes, it's just so nice because, like we were talking about before, people have something that they're doing at a certain time, and then 3 or 4 years later, things change, their story changes, And it's just so beautiful that we have the opportunity to do that. So tell me about your history as a news reporter and why you started Storytellers for Good. Because I had you on before when you were doing Storytellers for Good, and you're still doing it.
Yes.
But tell the audience about Storytellers for Good.
So thank you. I came to the work of Storytellers for Good, formerly as a television news reporter. And, I never thought I would get into TV news. I went to school in political science, public policy, and thought I was going to go to law school. But there was something about, challenging myself in that way. I'm naturally a bit shy, and I was actually drawn to that work because it forced me out of myself. And so I had a lot of great adventures in my TV news days, starting out in a teeny town, Naples, Florida, working my way up to, various affiliates, finally landing in Boston, which was my dream job. And I was finally there and working at a big station with helicopter and big live trucks, and felt like I had arrived, so to speak. And but I all too often found myself chasing crime stories, tragedy stories, and knocking on doors of people who had lost a loved one, sometimes chasing people out of courtrooms, sometimes out there in the snowstorm, putting my own life at risk. But, there were definitely fun, amazing aspects of it. And I do think it's important work. It just wasn't the work for me. And I had one experience in particular where I was covering a car accident and was asked to go see if there was a story about the woman who was unfortunately killed in it, and came to find her young daughter waiting outside the door. And when she saw the news truck and had put something she had read online together in her head, she, without me specifically saying it, had discovered and confirmed for herself that her mother was the one that was killed that morning. And it was the worst day of my professional career, and the day that I decided I needed to do something different. So to get through the last months of my contract, I started seeking out stories of people who had been in the news, but were doing, usually for some difficult or tragic circumstance, and were doing something positive. And I would get so excited about telling these stories, like could barely sleep the night before. I was so excited. And when my contract was up, I went and traveled for a while. I needed to detox from my years in TV news. And I just kept coming back to how much I loved those stories, and wanted to find a way to tell those stories more consistently. And I had an agent at the time who told me that, the job I was looking for didn't exist. And so I made a big life change, moving from the East Coast out here to the San Francisco Bay. And as part of that, decided I wanted to start a small company called Storytellers for Good, to really shine a light on the positive, amazing people of our world that are making a big difference. And not to say that, I believe that there's a role for the bad news in our world, that we need to stay informed. But I'm, through my work, hoping to make a statement about the need for balance, and the importance of really showing what's possible with making change in the world that we feel called to do, and really inspiring people with those stories.
And it's so funny, because I heard that too when I was doing Pay It Forward radio. It's like, good news doesn't sell. And it's like, and why not? Because especially now, if you look at the world, so many people are hurt and angry. So many things are happening, and it seems to us it's getting worse. So why wouldn't we want to hear something good, that and how love can change a situation, or how, somebody in another country, what they're doing has caused good for their community. I mean, I always have a problem with that, Cara, when I hear that, like, why isn't TV reporting more good?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's hard work. I having been a reporter, I see the way news cycles work. And, there's always this pressure, especially with 24-hour cable now, to just be on to the next thing and on to the next thing and on to the next thing. And usually, like even in the midst of tragedies is often where we find some of the most amazing stories of heroism.
Yeah.
But it takes time for those stories to surface and to tell those stories effectively and well. And, too often we're on to the next big tragedy to make time for those. So I'm not beholden to news cycles. So I make a point of trying to share these stories. I also, have been able to make a business of sorts out of it, in that I work primarily now with nonprofits to help them craft short films that they can use for fundraising tools to grow their work.
I love that. And I've always loved it. And I believe in what you're doing. And I think nonprofits of anyone, it's always so hard to come up with that money to be able to really share your mission with a very good video or a very good piece. And so for you to be able to do that and go out in the world and do that for nonprofits is really fantastic, because I worked in Dress for Success, and it was always hard to get a good video or just. And you have an eye for it. I will say that. I got to say that right now. I've seen some of your videos, and you really have an eye to tune into what the mission is and what the passion is of the organization. And I think that takes some skill. That just doesn't happen with any videographer, You have a very good eye for it.
Yeah, I think I'm grateful to my background in TV news, and that I had the experience almost every day of having to turn an issue-oriented story into something that people would care about, usually by finding someone that it impacted. And that's the way that I try to steer my clients now, is to really personalize their work through the lives of the people that they touch, and really reach the hearts, primarily, if nothing else, that you can just sort of take out a lot of the information so that the emotional impact is there, ideally in 2.5 minutes or less.
And we know. So yeah. I know. Many of us know. It is all about the story. Don't tell me about your organization so much. Tell me about the people's lives you've changed.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a beautiful thing to get that story out, because for me, I'm always attached to the story. It doesn't matter what organization is doing as much as it does about the stories and the people that they're supporting. So I love it. And I think all of you, if you don't know about Storytellers for Good, Cara does have a Facebook page, and she does have a website. It's www.cara-jones.com. Go there, have a look,
and that is my personal story coaching work, and Storytellers for Good also has its own website.
Oh, good. Okay. Perfect.
Storytellersforgood.com. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. Because go there and have a look. If you are a nonprofit, if you are looking to tell your story and you someone that has a good eye for that, I really, I'm going to toot your horn. I mean, Cara is the person to really look to. So please go and check it out. This personal story that's coming up has just really tugged at my heart. How did you begin telling this personal story with your upcoming documentary?
Well, let's see. Maybe I'll start with the story and then tell you about the telling of it, which will explain why the telling of it has been so hard. So I was raised in an organization called the Unification Church. My parents were some of the earliest members. My dad was one of the first presidents, and both had a close relationship with Reverend Moon, who is the controversial founder of the Unification Church, a group that's otherwise been called the Moonies.
Yep.
And so I was raised in this group, and one of the most unique aspects of it is the practice of arranged marriages and mass weddings, which here in the West is a bit wild for us. This is a practice that happens in the East more typically, and is less uncommon in Korea, for example, and India, but in Korea is where the founder is from. And so, long story short, when I was 20 years old, I had an arranged marriage, and I got married in the Seoul Olympic Stadium with 10,000 brides and grooms. The brides, many of us were wearing the same dress that was chosen for us, and standing next to men that were chosen for us. And I had met the person that I was matched to about a month before the ceremony. And and at the time, I maybe just on that day for the first time, started to acknowledge some doubts that I was feeling about it, but denied them for quite some time because this was the path that I was raised to walk, and it was the path that was walked by my parents and some of my best friends. And I decided that I wanted to do this, and the belief was that every person is a child of God and you should be able to love anyone, and if you struggled, then that was part of your spiritual path. And so I struggled, and at the same time I was studying and then my junior year at Princeton and trying to reconcile these two worlds. And it was a really difficult thing. And my marriage ended after many years of struggle and what felt at the time like a divorce from the church and frankly my parents at the same time. And so over time, my parents and I patched things up, but I had stopped really sharing this story because it felt so personal. And in some ways, I've always been drawn to people's stories, maybe in part because of my own journey. And so I made a life out of telling other people's stories. And in the back of my mind, there was always that but you have a story to tell. And it was, over the years, it's really been like my stalker.
Yeah.
I could not shake the story. And, I had the first more serious inkling to tell the story and, started doing some writing about 7 years ago. And it was just, there's the craft piece of actually writing and figuring out what to say. And then behind that is, the emotional blocks around, still trying to figure out what the whole thing was about and heal from it, and also deal with my fears around, how will this impact others, including my family, most importantly, if I tell this story. And so this was sort of my mindset. And then in 2012, I was at the Burning Man Festival.
Boy.
Single and trying mushrooms for the first time. Very different world from the world of my upbringing, where I'd never held a man's hand or taken a sip of alcohol, my whole life, leading up to my arranged marriage. So, I'm driving out of Burning Man, and I get these texts that start pouring in from friends, like, did you hear that Reverend Moon passed away? And it was this really emotional thing. I just, for those of you that know what Burning Man is, it's this sort of wild festival in the desert, and there's this wooden statue of a man that gets built in the center. And I'd actually been thinking about River Moon there because at the end of the festival, the man is burned, and the whole orientation of the camp changes because everything is built around this man, and then he's gone. And it felt like a similar type dynamic where I started to realize how central this person was in my life. In addition to knowing my parents, I had had interactions with him over the years. He chose my partner that ended up being a great source of pain in my life, and I just had this voice in my head that was like, okay, if you're ever going to do this, now's the time to tell the story. And so I decided to go to the funeral about a week later. And I bought the ticket about a night before I was supposed to leave. It was this instinctual thing. I just felt like, here's the story and it's unfolding, and I'm a journalist and I've got to be there, and I don't know exactly where this is going to lead. So the film actually started more as a exploration of this wild faith, and my brother, who also was raised in the church, and had his own struggle. He's gay, and that's not a path that's supported by the church teachings. And so he and I teamed up and got permission to film some of the modern day activities of the church, including, following a team of fundraisers for the church, selling trinkets, living out of a van, and parents who are, now that Reverend Moon has passed away, meeting and gatherings to help choose spouses for their children from a wall of pictures, and eventually ended up at another mass wedding, which still happens today, and was able to film all that. And so at a certain point, the story that started more as a journalistic endeavor turned much more personal, and I will save the rest for people to watch when it comes out.
Well, it's funny. We go through life and, we do certain things so we don't have to deal with our own stories, right? I mean, you chose Storytellers for Good. You're telling other people's stories, but you've got this big one in there and you are not ready to get rid of it. And so
it's not ready to get rid of me.
Right. And we just keep on sort of putting this shield around us so that we don't have to deal with it, and we do other things about it. So it sort of covers it up. And then to absolutely come to grips with that. I mean, if you're going to come to grips with it, Burning Man is the place to do it, right?
Yes, there's magic in the air there.
There is. I've never been, but I know people that have gone, and, bless their hearts. I mean, everybody comes away with something that they need to. That's what I believe. And I'm all for that, whatever it takes, And to be able to go back to the church after Reverend Moon passed and have a whole new set of eyes on what was going on, that must have been very different.
It was. I going into it felt like, oh, I'm a journalist. I can just go back as a journalist. And with each stop, I was surprised at the emotion that would surface. And at a certain point in the film, realized that I couldn't be objective. And so I think.
How did you get that story out then? I mean, you couldn't be.
How did I get which story out?
Like your story, your personal story that's in this documentary.
Yeah. So, where's the
got this out?
So whereas the film started more as this journalistic endeavor, there was a point where in the middle of the mass wedding, I see my dad on the stage in the middle of everything. And that's when I feel really shaken and torn, just as I was when I was married, between, this desire to tell my truth through this film this time, and this fear that if I do so, I might lose these people that I love or hurt them. And so the story becomes personal as I seek to reconcile that in a way that I didn't have the maturity to when I was 20.
Yeah.
And I realized that even though I thought I left the church, there was so much unresolved and anger and pain that I had buried that was keeping me in it in a way. And so I realized that I had to tell this story as a way of more fully leaving this part of my past behind.
Letting it go. right?
Yeah.
I mean, letting go is such a big thing in our lives, and there's so many things that happen to us that we have to let go of. We don't realize it at the time, and we don't realize it until it starts bubbling up inside. But that's
Hmm.
what happened to you. And, um, being able to share that story with all these other things on the outside going on, like, family relationships and what happened and your brother and you. And I mean, that is very courageous, Cara. Very courageous.
Thank you.
Wow. I mean, that's a lot to deal with. Um,
Hmm.
Looking at it, and when you're in it, I'm sure it's so different than, again, now being on the outside. But your perspective must be a lot different because now you're able to look at it so that you can heal from it. And that's a wonderful thing. There's just a beautiful things. And how did your parents join the Unification Church to begin with?
So my parents are kind of unlikely followers in a way. My dad had gone to Princeton and had come from a well-to-do family, but his father had left the home when he was younger, and was still involved here and there. But the breakup of his parents' marriage really impacted him on a deep level, and so he became a seeker, and had gone from graduating from college as an atheist to, believing in something, a higher power. And when he was out in the Bay Area searching, met someone who told him about the church, and something resonated with him. And Reverend Moon became a father figure to him in a spiritual way that he hadn't had. And my dad had actually dated my mom's best friend in college. And so, and then he was having all these commitment issues. And my mom was a strong Catholic, and she's like, you don't want him anyway. He's not a good Catholic. But years later, she ran into him in a New York City bookstore. She was at Columbia Teachers College and had come from this strong Catholic family. Her sister was a nun,
Same.
and oh, really?
Yes.
Yeah, so she wasn't looking to join a new religion, but she was so taken by the fact that my dad, who was this atheist, who had commitment issues, seemed to be really changed and so passionate about this teaching from this man from Korea. And so she began studying it, and they both had, in their individual ways, these emotional conversion experiences where they really felt called to be a part of this. And, the movement back then was, you know, Reverend Moon believed that he was the Messiah, and which doesn't go over that well with a lot of Christians. But there was a sense of urgency, like he's here, we got to tell the world. And so they, jumped in and lived in buses and traveled all over the country, spreading the word, and worked actually separately in the church before in 1970 they were married in a mass wedding, much to their parents' disappointment as well. So yeah, my mother's family in particular, the strong Catholics, really wanted them to get married in the church, but they, participated in the ceremony. My mom wore a white Korean dress with these plastic shoes, and just, looked up. She recalls looking up in this, sea of brides and grooms, 777, and seeing the sign that said "World Peace through Ideal Families," and she felt proud to be a part of this sort of revolutionary act of, bringing people of different races and cultures together in marriage, and they believed that they were going to save the world that way.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you, years later, stand in the same place she did.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think, the church has been called a cult, and, I sometimes say that I think families can be like cults.
Yes.
Because, we were raised, with love of these people that raise us, and this is the belief system that is handed down to us, and so we accept it and believe it, however strange.
Right. But when we're a kid,
Yeah.
and I was raised a Catholic as well, and I went to Catholic school. I did all of that. It took me years to get rid of the guilt, and all of that. But it's funny how, when people talk about religion, or when they talk about the religion they got into, they were at a place where they were searching.
Mm-hmm.
And, I don't know about you, but I remember looking at all different kinds of religions after not really being a Catholic anymore, and just searching to find out what was really resonated with me. And so for your parents, I mean, this happened to be what was resonating with them at the time and what they needed.
Yeah.
And, I mean, gosh, when we're searching, so many people these days don't even know what it means to have a higher power.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just so interesting that their path became your path as well for a period of time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think can't wait to see what my daughter comes up with. It's this cycle of, parents, like, we sort of rebel from what our parents teach us, and then our children rebel against us.
Well, it'll be all something new. It'll be a great story. It'll be a great story, Cara. I know it's going to be a great story.
I'm fully prepared.
So, you were raised in this. Your parents were in the Unification Church. You were in the Unification Church. Your brother was in the Unification Church. All of you became a family of the Unification Church. How did you end up leaving? And why did you, why and how? That's the burning question.
Yeah. So the whole system of arranged marriage is, very much, rooted in the belief that Reverend Moon has this divine connection through which he's able to see and intuit the best spouse for you. And, he famously would take, in the early days, a room full of people, hundreds of men and women, men on one side, women on the other. And with the point of a finger, he would say, you and you. And people would get married that way, sometimes not even speaking the same language. But again, the belief is that every person is a child of God. And so people walk through this faithfully. And growing up, I knew this was coming. And as I said, I didn't date or drink. And I was very much a goody two-shoes, despite going to a public high school and playing, I was the captain of my lacrosse team. So I had this sort of double life. But I believed naively, I think, that, if I was just a good church member, Sunday school teacher, all the things that I did, that I would get a good husband, that God would bless me, and through Reverend Moon. And, I did get matched to a wonderful human being. And, the process that we were both put through was, painful for us both. I'll just leave it at that. But it didn't meet, I didn't realize I had expectations until they were shattered. And it was really the fact that I was married to someone that I didn't feel I could be attracted to or love, that began to shake my faith. And at the same time that I started to struggle, news was coming out about Reverend Moon and his illegitimate son, and various members of his family that I had looked up to, who were having struggles with alcoholism and infidelity and other abuses, and so the whole picture that I was raised with started to fall apart. And so, all of this happened over the course of years. I was married on paper for 5 years, as I said, in part because it was so consequential to divorce, not just between he and I, but with the church and with my family. But as I said, coming out of all of this, I don't know if we ever fully leave these experiences that we're raised with. And I think as long as we know that, we're okay.
And that's an interesting concept that you say that.
And I think it will always be a part of who I am. I mean, I was taught that I was going to save the world. In my own
you are in some ways.
In my own
with your
ways.
filmmaking, you are.
I'm still acting that out for better or worse.
You are.
And there's good and bad, things about my upbringing that will always influence who I am, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
I think the more consciousness that I've brought to it, the more I do leave, and the more I do have freedom to build another life for myself, which is, what was so hard for me for many years is that I spent about 15 years, battling with alcoholism. I wouldn't say alcoholism per se, but just really abusing alcohol as an escape.
Yeah. Numbing that whole scenario for yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. And, dating all the wrong people and sort of sabotaging my efforts to move my life forward because something wasn't resolved. And so I feel like I was more stuck then, and I feel like I'm more in a process of leaving, but I'm okay if I die still leaving.
Yeah. Yeah. And age helps.
Yeah.
That's what I think.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, age really gives us a way of looking at things a lot differently and taking what we need, leaving the rest, but realizing that we all are on a journey, and whatever that journey is ours.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes us who we are. And the good, bad, and the ugly, I mean, it gives us so much, to draw from in our lives. So, yours happened to be this situation.
Yeah.
But I love the way that you're turning it around to give others knowledge about it, to get what you need out into the open, but to still keep your family intact. That's a big deal. That's a big deal.
It is. And it didn't seem possible when I was leaving my marriage that could happen.
Right.
Honestly, it felt like either I was going to be unhappy in a marriage or my family would disown me. I mean, it really felt that way. That didn't happen, to my parents' credit, but it was a real struggle. And this film and the making of it has brought up a very similar dilemma. And as part of our film, we talked to a woman who specializes in working with people who leave cults. And her initial reflection was that most of the people who leave can't maintain relationships with people who are still in it. And, regardless of whether you think the Unification Church is a cult, it's a challenging thing to reconcile a belief system that's so different. And I think, to my parents' credit, and maybe to some of my own, we've worked through it, and that is part of the journey of the film that will be explored, is how we've done that.
So excited to see it. I'm so excited to see it. And you also have a Facebook page called The Second Coming, or
Second
Coming, the documentary.
Yes.
Yes, yes. And I would encourage people to go there and look, because it really kind of outlines a little bit of what's happening and how you're going about it. And it's very informative. And I, for one, am very interested in the documentary. I can't wait to see it, because I know you. And, it's, that saying about, be kind to every single person you meet, because you never know what they're dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's so true. It's just so true. And in the situation with you and the Unification Church and your family and all of that, I would have never known that before.
No, people have known
me. You were just a storyteller for good.
People have known me for years and years, we just actually, after many years of holding back, I put out a Kickstarter, which is I think how we connected, and we have a short trailer on there, and
Right.
so it was the first
People
time
still contribute?
no, it's past now.
It's end. Okay.
But yeah, you can sort of check out our trailer there and a little bit about the campaign. But yeah, people who had known me for decades had never seen that footage of me standing in the stadium in the mass wedding, and were just in disbelief that was me, as I could be sometimes too when I look at that.
Absolutely.
So long ago.
Absolutely. But with the other part of your business that you're doing, helping people to tell their stories. Wow. I mean, it's almost like, to me, if she can tell her story, then I certainly can.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, really, for someone like you to have such an intense story like you do and be able to sort of help people along with their own story. I love that. I love that part of your business that you're doing. I think that's just fantastic.
Yeah,
And
it's really.
Send them my way when they're ready to tell them, will you?
No, it's great. You have a wonderful platform. I really believe. I mean, one thing that happened for me is before I went public with a story, and I worked with various coaches. A friend of mine, Heather Box at the Million Person Project in particular, who really helped me get clear about what I wanted to say about the story, because it's so sensational that it can just sort of come out like, this wild thing happened, and people are fascinated, but I didn't want to just be, that like shiny object story. People are like, woo, I've never heard that before. Tell it again. Or, I didn't want to just be, that person telling their story for the sake of telling the story. I wanted to tell it with a sense of purpose. And, once I got clear about the purpose for which I was exploring the story and sharing the story, it really helped. And so that's really what I hope to bring to others that I work with, is really help them make clear about what they're trying to say through the story, why they want to share it. And then it becomes easier because you have this higher purpose. And I'm also, in my own experience, have seen that the process of telling the story has given me a level of awareness and consciousness about myself that I wouldn't never have had, that I credit for really moving my life forward in a way that it wasn't when I began telling this story 5 years ago.
It's so interesting, too. I remember telling my story to a group of professional women in Dress for Success. And I think they saw me as just being the executive director and not really having a story. And when I told them my story, it was so empowering because they had a piece of it. Like we all kind of do. We all have a piece of each other's story. But to get it out on the table was so empowering and made me look at it in a whole nother light. In the light of, wow, yes, this was your story, but you're not alone in this story. Didn't only happen to you, right? Yeah. So I really believe, boy, if we can get that story that's deep inside of us out, it will open up so many parts of our being that we never even realized were there.
And opportunities for connection and
exactly,
and really amplifying the message that we want to share with the world.
Absolutely.
I think the new leadership model.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what is your approach to telling the story in this film? Is it well, you tell us.
Yeah. So, like I said, the Unification Church is called the cult, and I, I'm less worried about like, is it or isn't it, or claiming it is or isn't, and defining what that is. For me, what I think is most interesting is the complexity of the story.
Yeah.
Is the fact that I, in some ways, was scarred by my experience, but I was also blessed by the experience. And there are people in the church who were scarred way worse than me, and those are real stories and their tragedies, really, of others who were raised in it and beyond. But that wasn't entirely my experience. And, we also interview people who feel that their lives were healed and deeply blessed by it in a way that, that they don't feel their lives would have moved forward in the same way without it. And those people include my parents.
Okay.
And so whereas most cult documentaries, have more of an expose bent and interview all these people who, have been abused and suffered, we, in telling the story, I try to make it as personal as possible. I always teach in my storytelling workshops the importance of having a character. And it wasn't until, a few years into making this film that I was like, holy shit, I'm the character. and I'm still trying to own, like, okay, this is, there's a much broader story being told, but my story is the through line for the audience to follow. And my story shows these complexities and offers opportunities for others to share their complexities as well. And I think it makes for a much more interesting inquiry into truth and the way it can be different for different people, even, within the context of a family. And so I hope to leave people with their ideas of cult followers kind of shaken, and their ideas about their families maybe shaken up a little bit, and
Right.
And really asking questions about what it takes to walk a path separate from the people that we love, which I think is really the heart of the story.
And what are your parents? I mean, what did they think about you telling the story?
Yeah, they were skeptical at first. They're very loving people, and it's hard not to like them.
Yeah.
Even though, people might have criticism of them, given some of the choices that they've made. But, we went through a lot over the end of my marriage, and there was a big rupture in our relationship that we are still healing from. And this has had the potential of doing the same, and they've expressed their concerns about it. But because of where we both are in our lives right now, they're not interested in not having a relationship with me. And I think, to their credit, they understand, even though they don't totally understand why I'm doing this. They trust my sense of calling around it. They had a similar sense of calling around joining the church that didn't really make sense for our family in some ways, but they did it. And so they can relate on that front. And it's actually been, it's been very healing for me to have their support. And at the same time, I also had gotten to the point where I knew that I had to do this, even if it meant, not having the same relationship. So all of that has happened over
It's
these
such
years.
a bonus, really, because like you said, it could have gone the other way where, in fact, they just could have turned their back on you for, coming out with all of it, exposing certain things about themselves that maybe they weren't ready to look at either. But it didn't
And the film
happen.
hasn't come out yet, so.
Right. But it didn't happen that way
Yeah.
for them and you.
Just even the fact that they are allowing me to interview them. I've interviewed them over these years, more recently, much more honestly than I have in the past. So, there's a love between us now that goes beyond this, and I hope as the film comes out that will continue.
Yeah, that's really wonderful because, again, despite what people think about the Unification Church, despite what they think about Reverend Moon, despite all of that, how can you judge them for, you can't really judge them for what happened in their lives and why they were attracted to that
right
at that moment, or I just think, and we can't be that judge and jury all the time for everybody. Certain things happen in my life that I've done that people probably think, why did she do that? What led her to do that? But again, unless you walked in my shoes, would you know? And the same with your parents,
Well, and the other complexity is that whereas certain things that they did hurt me,
right,
in their minds, they thought they were doing what was best for me.
Right.
And in their truest hearts, they really believed that I would be blessed by going through all this.
Right. And for them to understand that that wasn't the case,
mm-hmm.
what they thought was their truth was not yours.
Mm-hmm.
That is a big, big deal to swallow.
Yeah, it is.
It's really a big deal to swallow.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you hope people will take away from this documentary?
As I said earlier, I think just sort of shaking up people's ideas. It's easy to judge people and look at things from the outside. And so I hope that they, will maybe, again, that idea of like cult followers, right? Will be shaken up a little bit, in good and bad ways.
Right.
Worse in some ways and better in some ways. And like I said, I think there's a real universal thread here around, the challenge of being ourselves. We're living in a time where very few of us are walking the path of the spiritual paths of our parents, and really forging new identities in the world that might not be accepted. Having new thoughts and consciousness that was not around in the previous generation, and even for the political times that we're living in, understanding how people can come to believe something seemingly crazy.
Yeah.
And even if you don't agree with that, walking away with a little more empathy. And I think our world needs more empathy at its root.
I agree. I think so too. I think we do need more empathy, and we do need more understanding, and we do need more acceptance and non-judgment of others. That, there's just so much of that going on. How is life now different than you imagined growing up? Because now you have a daughter.
Yeah. So when I was growing up, I was sure with 100% certainty in my bones, right, that I would be married in the church, and that I would do the work of spreading the word of the Messiah, and likely be, leading a church congregation, and really saving the world. I mean, we were, especially the second generation of this movement, were taught that the future was in our hands, and unlike other cults, like, we were taught to live in the world and try to go to good colleges so that we could really make an impact on the world. And so that was the path. And so I now am married to somebody who is not from the church.
Oh, fantastic.
And he's a children's summer camp director, and we live in a children's summer camp for 3 months a year.
I love it. Fantastic.
And I have this daughter. I'm 42 years old, and through love and science and a miracle, really, was able to have a daughter, baby late in life. And so, both my husband and I have been married before, and just feel so lucky to have found each other, and so lucky to have a family. And so, I think there's, the life I'm leading now is smaller in a way, but a truly happier life. I couldn't imagine being this happy along this journey, and
I love it.
And still aiming to make a positive impact where I can, in whatever small way that can happen. And again, just trying to live each day with gratitude for where I'm at, because truly in those 15 years of struggle, I didn't think this was possible.
Wow. Happiness shows on your face.
Mm.
Every time I see you, you look happy.
Yeah.
And every time I see your beautiful face, and you're doing videos now, you have a piece about you that is so attractive to all of us. And gosh, I can't imagine you being any other person than you are right now. And I'm really grateful to know you. And I'm really grateful that you are opening our eyes to your story. And you're so courageous to tell it. And that we get to share in that with you. I can't tell you what that means to me. I just really can't. So I am just so grateful that you came on tonight and you shared a little bit about your story, and it makes us want more, really. And I can't wait to see the documentary. And when will it be released?
That's a question of the day. We are busy in the structure process. We've mostly shot filmed the film. And so we're just translating all these hard drives into feature length. So we're working diligently to actually physically edit the piece between December and early 2018. So it'll be completed then, from which our aim will be to get it into a festival and then out into the world from there.
That's fantastic. I cannot wait to see it. I cannot wait I just can't wait to see where your journey is going to go next, because you are far from done. Storytellers for Good is still in the making. It's still happening. And I love I think it's the new thing where you're helping people to tell their stories. And I love that, because I think we all need a little coursing to get it out. And we all need some kindness and love around being able to do that. And you're the perfect person for that. You just are.
Thank you, Kathy. I do feel I've earned my stripes on this path, and what better thing to do with that than make it easier and hopefully more of an efficient process for others. And I do feel a sense of deep calling around that even the process of telling my story is as much about how I can help others as it is about, freeing myself.
Yeah, it's inevitable that you would do this. It's inevitable that in your time of, your journey and your story, that you would give back to others and show them the way. I wouldn't have thought that you would be any other way. I just wouldn't. So I appreciate you being here so much. Well, there's people coming on now. Shirley Star Love Alton. And she's saying, great message, not to judge. We all have our own mission to good to accomplish. Happy for you that you found yourself and your mission. So thank you, Shirley, for coming on. I don't know Shirley, but I love the way that these interviews get out to people and they hear exactly what they need to hear. And tonight, Cara, I really appreciate you coming on, and I really appreciate our connection and all that you have shown me in your life and you've shown others. It's so admirable. It's so admirable, I've got to say. So thank you for coming on. I want to thank everyone that's joined us this evening. I know if you didn't see it live that you're going to go back and watch it. You'll find it on my YouTube channel. You'll find it on www.kathybacon.com. You'll find it on my Facebook page. I will share it with Cara and give her a piece of it, because I really want you to connect with her. I have her information on my website, and I have your contact information. And what I put on there is like your Facebook page for the second coming,
Mm-hmm.
your Facebook page, Storytellers for Good, your website. So there's no way that people cannot get a hold of you.
Awesome.
And thank you. I really thank you so much. It means the world to me to see you again and see your smiling, happy face. It just does my heart good, Cara. And all the blessings to you and your family. And I'll be watching you. Believe me. And thank you again. Thank you all for tuning in to What's Your Story. I appreciate you taking the time out this evening to listen about Cara's story. And thank you again. I will see you all next week, and I look forward to it. So good night, everyone.